Hello, I'm Paddy Delaney, and welcome to Integrated Infrastructure, a podcast dedicated to bringing you news and views from industry leaders involved in the development, design, construction and management of the many built forms that make up Australia's integrated infrastructure. This is episode 13 of Integrated Infrastructure. This week, I'm talking to Rob Ioffrida, General Manager of Construction Support Services at Fulton Hogan. In this episode, we talk about Rob's early career, starting out in the recession that we had to have in the early 90s. How Rob came to lead what would now be a $350 million project at the age of just 27 years old. And we talk about why Rob laments the change of focus in delivering projects from engineering to legal over the years. Rob talks about why the industry's eternal optimism and can-do attitude can be its greatest weakness. Rob offers advice to those starting out in the industry, and he tells us why he's excited about the industry and government collaborating to create a more sustainable environment for business. Amongst other things, Rob tells us why he celebrates the diversity of background and skills that we now see in civil engineering in Australia. I hope you enjoy the podcast. Please like, share, comment, and subscribe if you do. So without any further ado, here's my conversation with Rob. Rob, welcome to Integrated Infrastructure. Thanks ever so much for joining us today. As always, let's start off with a quick introduction from you. Tell us who you are, who you work for, and go for it.
Thank you, Paddy, and thank you all. Yes, Robert Ioffrida. I'm the General Manager for Construction Services for Fulton Hogan, based in Sydney, but have a national role across the Australian business, supporting all the different regions throughout Fulton Hogan.
Fantastic. And Rob, I see you're in your office at the moment, so you guys are obviously hard at it at the moment.
I am indeed. Fortunately, here in our Sydney office, anyway, Fulton Hogan hasn't been as impacted as some of our colleagues in the southern states. So, look, other than some initial slowdown in March, April this year, it's been pretty much business as usual for us, both in the regional office here in Sydney and also on our projects, which has been very fortunate, because I know that's not the same for everybody. But for us, it's actually we've actually got through it pretty much unscathed.
Yeah, fantastic. That's really good. And we were talking sort of before the podcast, weren't we, about having a chat around your career and where you started. And it'd be great if you could take us back to your first steps into the career, and what the world looked like then, and how all that sort of unfolded.
Well, that was a very different world back in those days. I'll have to think back in the old memory, but I've been here for 4 years, or just on 4 years with Fulton Hogan, but my career started considerably earlier, back in the early 90s, where I started working for Abbey Group. It's Abbey Group Contractors. It's a name that's probably not around anymore, but was around for many years, and was one of the premier road building construction businesses, certainly through the 80s, 90s, and through the 2000s, up until it was acquired by Lend-Lease, and later on became Lend-Lease Engineering. But I think like most graduates, engineering graduates, I took the construction path. I got into contracting early and landed on a project. It was very different back in those days. It was at the time of the 90s. It was during the recession. There probably wasn't as much work as there is now. People were happy to have work. I was lucky to have been employed by Abbey Group, which turned out to be a great company to work for, a great business, but also a great training ground for my future career. But like most graduates, I started on a project, on a regional project down south on the Hume Highway, just south of Wagga Wagga, as a quality engineer, which is where most graduates started their careers back in those days.
Still there, I think.
Absolutely. Quality assurance was new then. I think RMS, or RTA as it was back then, had just picked it up, and basically most projects put the least experienced person into the quality role, because it was seen as either a paper/compliance role or one of the less sexier things to do on site. But actually turned out to be a really good training ground, because you actually had to be across the entire aspects of the project. you weren't just pigeonholed into one area or one discipline. You got to be involved in all aspects, and it turned to be a really good a foundation for building a career.
Fantastic. And is construction in the blood, Rob, or is it something that you you came upon and thought that's something I really want to do?
No, it was never in the blood. I was always attracted more towards the sciences and maths part. When I was at school, they were my strong points. I just used to look at infrastructure projects and buildings and think, wow, they'd be good to work on those one day, and mainly because of my strength in maths and sciences, I landed at civil engineering at New South Wales University and have been involved in the industry ever since.
Yeah, fantastic. And you just touched on there. You started your career in the recession that we had to have, which was the last recession Australia experienced. Yeah. What was it like starting out then? I mean, you said you're obviously quite willing and happy to go and work away from home and get stuck in.
Absolutely. So look, it was tougher job wise. Certainly, there wasn't as much opportunity as there is now. The rise of the mega projects hadn't started yet. So now where we see mega projects in metropolitan cities all around Australia at the time, most of the spend was regional and building highway infrastructure. So there wasn't as much opportunity to shop around with different companies and by and large, there weren't recruiters ringing you up, giving you uncontested opportunities to go and work elsewhere. You were very happy to have a job, and as long as you were loyal to that business, especially with Abbey Group, they were prepared to back you and employ you for a career, not necessarily just on a project. Which was very comforting at the time, because you knew you had a plan in place to progress your career if that's what you wanted to do.
That's brilliant.
But yes, it was very different back in those days. It was there certainly wasn't any job shopping around.
Yeah, it's very different now, and you're a rare beast even in this environment, in that you've only ever worked really for two companies, isn't it?
That's right. That's right. Yes. So I started my career, as I said, as a graduate, and through a bit of hard work and some success and some opportunity, I did the career progression over the site engineer, then the project engineer, then in 1998, I got my first opportunity to run a project as project manager. We called them project managers back in those days. Now they call them project directors. But that was a $65 million design and construct project at Sydney Airport. So probably 350 million or 400 million today's money at the age of 27.
That's good.
That would never happen these days. It's something that the industry has moved a long time from that. But when you're 27 and running a DMC job for the first time, it either makes it good if you got what it takes to be good, or you give up pretty quick. And that was a really good baptism of fire. And I look back now and reflect on those times, and I cherish them.
What's the favourite project that you've worked on?
Oh, look, I think for lots of different reasons, projects have been good and some not so good. I talked about that Sydney Airport job. It was called Sydney Airport 2000, which was basically getting the airport ready for the Olympics in 2000. So Abbey Group had a large contract there to upgrade all the taxiways and runways to get it prepared for the increased traffic that was going to come in because of the Olympics. I really enjoyed that one because I worked on the bid as well too. So it wasn't just the delivery end. I was the bid director, so I knew the job backwards before we even started, and financially turned out to be a pretty good job and have some really good memories. But some other projects that I've worked on over the years. On railways, the East Hills Railway line back in 2001, and even my last job, which was the Koopanuk bypass on the Pacific Highway back in 2003. Again, I look back with fond memories and good people, and it was a good time to be in the industry. It was a tough time, but it was a good time.
Yeah. Fantastic. And what are the biggest changes that you've seen in the industry over your career so far?
Oh, look, I think there's been lots of changes. As I mentioned earlier, the rise of the mega projects has really changed the complexities of construction. So the engineering aspects have become far more complex. The people issues are broader because we're on a job. Again, I think back to my last project as a project manager, which was a $140 million equivalent bypass. We probably had maybe 25 staff. On a similar sized job now, in today's dollars, you'd probably have 125 staff. So the complexities of these big projects has taken the focus away just from the engineering aspects, and now you have to focus very much on safety, on the environment, sustainability, the community and stakeholder issues, and the legacy issues that you're going to leave behind after you leave. So that's a big change. The other thing that has changed, and perhaps not so much in a good way, is that it's less about the construction engineering these days and more about the contractual and legal and commercial side of delivering a project.
Yeah,
contracts have become far more onerous, certainly from the days when I was out there. You're more it's almost written in such a way that it's sort of that the cards are stacked against you before you even start. The specifications are less technical these days and far more contractual. So where the contract doesn't get you, the specification will. They're written by lawyers for lawyers, intended for clients to transfer all the risk to the contractor, and unfortunately that has made the delivery projects, especially these days, far more complex than what they were maybe 20 years ago, even a decade ago.
Absolutely. It's something that we've talked a lot about on this podcast around risk allocation and what needs to be done going forward. And, there's a need for a more equitable alliancing, whatever you want to call it, type model, because we're in the profitless boom, right?
Absolutely. The pendulum had swung too far. So while I understand clients' desire to contract out their risk, and they will say, well, the contractor's in the best position to manage and mitigate that risk, and that's probably true. But at the time of tender, you're not really in the best position to understand and quantify it. And you can't in 6 or 8 weeks fully be across a project that's taken 2 or 3 years to develop from the client's perspective and price all that risk and understand it. And unfortunately, because these days, or for a large portion of the contracts, they're price driven, so cheapest price wins. You have this fine line between pricing all the risks and unknowns, but at the risk of making yourself uncompetitive. And unfortunately, one of the shortcomings of the industry is this eternal optimism that things will work out at the end. And I know it because I sit through bid reviews all the time, and I sit through project reviews all the time. There's always this optimism that it'll just work out at the end, and we'll take the risk and we'll be right. But unfortunately, it's not always the case. As a matter of fact, and many times it's not always the case.
Yeah, well, or you get the rise of the commercial managers, as you said, and people have a claim strategy at tender stage.
Yeah. When I first started, I think at Abbey Group we might have had one lawyer in the business. By the time I left and was with Lend-Lease, I think we had 14. And now it's not unusual. It's just quite typical to have a commercial team and some lawyers on a project, simply to deal with the contractual aspects that you've signed up to. Sometimes unwittingly, and sometimes without knowing the outcome, but nevertheless you are held accountable to them. And this is what I was saying earlier about the engineering aspects of construction now taking not so much a back seat, but an equal seat alongside the legal and contractual and non-engineering aspects of the project.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, while we're touching on Abbey Group and Lendlease, we should probably congratulate Acciona for completing the sale yesterday,
Absolutely.
or the purchase yesterday, and
Absolutely.
it's good news for a lot of people that are still in that business that both
Yeah,
you and
look,
I know.
I think it's good news for the remaining employees with Lendlease who are probably in a bit of limbo for time. But I think it's great news for industry as well too, because having a strong having players out there and strong players who are actually want to be in industry and want to back it is actually good for us all. And well done to Acciona and congratulations to Lendlease for completing the sale.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's we talked about what's changed in the industry. What stayed the same?
Well, I think it's always a people-driven industry. There's certainly been a lot more technology that's come in these days through the use of BIM or digital engineering and machine control. But ultimately, it's founded with people, and it's always been that way since the Romans, I suppose, when construction first started, or even the Egyptians, I should say. So without people, we don't have an industry. And it's still a rewarding industry in the sense that there is a tangible outcome to what you do, and the legacy of what we build or what we design remains for generations. Long after the team has gone, or long after even the business has gone, the legacy of what's been done is actually there for people to see. So I think from that perspective, it's rewarding personally to see that. It's still a can-do industry. I spoke earlier about the eternal optimism of the projects and the people in it, but I think it's optimism based on can-do. And it doesn't matter, whether you're walking onto a project now or a project 20 years ago. Everyone is working hard to deliver that job, and I think that can-do attitude in the business, in the industry, if we had that in other industries or more in society, I think we'd be better off.
Yeah, fantastic. I tend to agree. And what do you think the future looks like for the industry? What's on the horizon?
Oh, look, I think that's probably something in two parts. I think there's the short-term crisis that's happening right now through COVID, and we know that one of the ways that the governments have tried to deal with COVID is, or certainly from the economic perspective, is to get money out there, and construction is a very efficient way of getting money out to the economy, because that's done through various levels. It's through the contractors and designers and consultants, but also through the suppliers, subcontractors, the workers. It's a really good way of getting money from the government to the people where it matters. But COVID aside, I think construction in Australia, certainly in the last decade and the decades to come, I think has a very bright future. Infrastructure has always been the primer for the economy. If things are going well, there's lots of money out there and things are being built. But if things aren't going well, governments use it as a way of priming the economy. So it means that infrastructure doesn't go through this boom and bust cycle like the building side of the business may do, or the residential side of the business may do. I think it's far more steady. If you look at the growth of the Australian population, and again, COVID aside, if you look at the growth over the last few decades and the trends, the growing population, the increased demand for transport and better transport, and also governments spending money to take care of the infrastructure backlog that's happened over the years, means that there's lots of opportunity for growth. But finally, probably Australia more than any other country has probably the most active PPP market in the world, and by that I mean where private money and government money is used together to deliver infrastructure. So and that's why you've got so many foreign entrants here at the moment trying to establish Australia, or have established, because of the attractive, from a work perspective anyway, PPP market where you've got private funds flowing into infrastructure. So when you add all those things up, the population growth, either organic or through immigration, the pent-up demand for transport, the PPP money or private money coming in, that leads to a very buoyant and active market in infrastructure. So for me, the future is looking bright. This pause aside with COVID, hopefully in a year's time or in a couple of years' time, we'll be back to where we would have been under the original projections, and there's lots of opportunity for people and companies out there in the market.
Yeah, absolutely, and there is money around. This is what's different to the 2008 recession,
yes.
or the GFC.
That's right.
There is far more liquidity, and there are investment funds and pensions and specific people like IFM coming out and saying, yes, we have money. We have money.
So that market is looking for somewhere to go. I mentioned the PPP market being very buoyant and very attractive, but I think it's got to be a bit more equitable. I think it's very buoyant for the investors, maybe not so much for the D&C contractor. But again, with more equitable models to PPP, and some are coming out now where the risks are being shared a bit more equitable, then that does give opportunity for the D&C contractor or the constructor to actually share in some of the boom.
Yeah, absolutely, and there are various sort of voices in the industry, whether that's from the contractor side or from the investor side, talking about the mid-tier contractors having a greater share of that PPP work as well.
Absolutely, and governments have actually focused on that. So one of the things that the government has done recently is actually respond to industry's feedback on how to improve industry. The cost of bidding and the cost of mobilising big projects had just become too great, which meant that some of the smaller contractors, the tier 2s and tier 3s, just were locked out of that market. The problem with big projects is they take such a long time to start, and you might announce a job, but it might be 2 or 3 years before we actually have boots on the ground. Whereas the smaller construct-only projects, which are relatively cheap to bid, and can be converted quite quickly. 6 months after the bid's gone in or the project's been released for tender, you're actually starting work, and it's a great way of priming the economy, but also getting people out there and working and delivering, not just sitting in the office working on deals. So governments have been really good in responding to that challenge.
Yeah, fantastic. Conscious of the fact that we could probably talk for hours here, and keeping it within a reasonable contained manner. But before I ask you my last question, there are engineers and young engineers from top tier and second tier contractors at the moment who might be finding themselves in this lull of work without a home and looking for work. I think there are at the moment. There definitely are. What advice would you give them? Harking back to your sort of start in the industry in a recession?
Look, I think one of the advice is you don't always have to start at the top. So an opportunity, a step on the ladder is always better than not being on the ladder at all. I think through my a lot of the skills and understandings I have of the industry now was actually built on working on smaller projects where you got exposure to everything from the construction side, but through to the contractual, the financial, the client relation side. So don't always look for the big project. The big sexy projects are great, but you tend to also get pigeonholed in certain areas. And I don't want to be flippant, but if you're looking after the line marking on a mega project and that's all you're doing, and it might be worth $50 million, but that's all you're doing, it's not the same as being on a $50 million job where you're looking after a whole lot. Be prepared to take the risk and travel to regional areas, because working outside of the cities, apart from it being a great experience, is a really great life experience too. I mean, you're out of your comfort zone. You're seeing something new. You're probably not as not as supported as well in terms of having head office support, because you don't have the head office oversight, because you don't have the bosses and people dropping all the time, and it gives you a lot of autonomy to actually grow and make decisions. There's great opportunities out there if you look.
Fantastic, great advice. And Rob, to finish us off, tell us, what are you excited about at the moment?
Oh, look, again, COVID aside, because everything you've got to do has got to come back to where we are right now. But if you look forward, I'm really excited about the fact that for the first time, for a long time, governments and industry are coming together to try to mould a better looking industry, a more sustainable industry. So I mentioned earlier about some of the challenges we're having, and those challenges, while over the last 10 to 20 years, there's been lots of work and lots of revenue, it hasn't been matched by growth and profits. As a matter of fact, you mentioned earlier the profitless boom. It's been a lot of work just for practice. I think governments have realised to make industry to make this industry sustainable, we need to change the way we deliver. And when I talk about sustainability, I don't just talk about the sustainability of the businesses and the companies and making profit. That the days of 6 or 7 day working weeks and coming to work at the crack of dawn and leaving it late at night and having half as many staff on the project as you really need and almost wearing as a badge of honour that you've worked many weeks straight. That's got to stop. I mean, work-life balance is and making sure that people stay in the industry for long term has to be our focus. And I'm really glad that a lot of businesses are looking at the 5-day working week now on their construction sites, or at least having rosters on their projects to allow a 5-day working week for its staff. Something that was unheard of when I first started. But likewise, clients are also doing the same, because a lot of the work practices on our construction sites in regards to long hours and tight timeframes and pressure were driven by clients who had set unrealistic end dates and then exorbitant penalties for not getting there through their contractual arrangements, which force you to do it. So clients now are being a bit more flexible about the deadlines they're setting. So I think it's becoming a much more people-focused and people-friendly industry. And if you walk onto a construction site these days, I think back in the early days, it was really the domain of the 30-year-old male engineer. You walk onto it now, and it's the diversity is incredible, and it's not just diversity in gender; it's diversity in background, in culture, in experience, in age. It's a far more reflective workplace, reflective of society, not just a male-dominated environment.
Reflective of the whole world in Australia, isn't it? I mean, you can have somebody from Iran, Pakistan, Spain, Italy, France, everywhere.
I used to jokingly say a few years ago that if we keep only hiring 30-year-old male engineers, eventually we'll run out of people we can hire. And I think industry has seen that, and right now the different views and the different approaches to delivering a project you get from different overseas experience and different cultural experience has made for a much better and much more pleasant work experience than what was maybe 20 years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. I think once the borders do open, we are going to see that population growth come back, and we're going to see a lot of international engineers wanting to come and work in Australia. I think
absolutely. I think it's still a very exciting place to work, and the projects that we take on here and deliver are world leading, and we do use world leading techniques and I can see why it's an attractive place to work in, and I know that doesn't come down to dollars and cents, but it's an attractive and lucrative place to have a career. After all, you still have to pay your mortgage, so I can understand why people are attracted to come into Australia to work, and why there's more and more people doing engineering as a subject at university because the demand is there and will continue to grow.
Yeah, absolutely. Rob, thank you so much. I know that you're busy today, so I'm going to let you get on. You've shared some fantastic experience with us and thoughts around the industry, now and in the future. So thanks ever so much for joining us.
Right. Look, thank you very much, Paddy. It's certainly been a pleasure, and I hope people do get something out of this and enjoy watching the podcast.
I'm sure they will. Have a fantastic day.
Likewise.
Thanks, Rob.
Bye-bye.
Integrated Infrastructure is powered by North Search, specialists in executive and technical search across engineering, design, construction, property and energy markets in Australia. If you'd like to find out more about North Search or get involved with this podcast, you can click on the links in the show notes or email me directly at the address on the screen. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Integrated Infrastructure. Please tell your friends and colleagues if you did, and we hope to see you again soon.